September 1944. The sun broke over Nebraska like fire on glass. Fritz Keller sat in the back of a canvas-covered army truck, handcuffed, watching America roll past through dusty slits in the canvas. Cornfields, windmills, white farmhouses that looked painted onto the horizon. He was a prisoner of war, a German soldier, and this peaceful land felt more alien than any battlefield. The truck rattled down a gravel road, past barns the color of dried blood, and silos tall as church steeples. The other prisoners sat silent, faces blank, eyes distant. They'd surrendered weeks ago in France. Now they were laborers, farm workers, ghosts in enemy territory. The guard nearest Fritz, Corporal Ryan Brooks from Chicago, leaned back and shouted over the engine noise, "Listen up! You're here to work, not cause trouble. You keep your heads down, you eat, you act stupid, you go back in chains. Understood?" No one answered. No one needed to. The truck slowed, turned down a narrow lane, and stopped in front of a tall red barn. Chickens scattered. A dog barked furiously from the porch of a white farmhouse with green shutters. Ryan hopped down, boots crunching gravel, and called out names. "Keller, Brown, Weber, Schulte, Vogue, you're with me." Fritz jumped down. The air smelled like earth and gasoline and something else. Fresh bread. Then a man walked out of the barn. He was tall, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, wore faded overalls and a sweat-stained work shirt. His eyes were calm blue, the kind that had seen too many hard seasons to be surprised by much. He nodded to Ryan, then looked at the prisoners. "Morning, boys," he said in clear English. "Name's Henry Mueller. This is my place." Fritz froze. Mueller. Behind him, another prisoner, Otto Braun, let out a sharp breath. "Mueller," he whispered in German. "An American farmer named Mueller." Fritz's pulse quickened. "It's a common name," he muttered back. "Could mean nothing." But then Henry did something that stopped every man cold. He switched to German. "Wir fangen by the Nordfeld," Henry said, his accent soft but unmistakable. "We'll start at the Northfield. Die Mais hat vor dem Sturm einkommen sein. The corn has to come in before the storm." Fritz blinked hard. The farmer sounded like someone's uncle in Bavaria. Ryan frowned, surprised. "You speak German, Mr. Mueller?" Henry didn't flinch. "My folks came from over there," he said casually, slipping back to English. "A lot of us around here did." Fritz and the others exchanged glances. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world where names mean more than borders, drop a comment below and tell me where you're from. And if this story already sounds impossible, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about World War II. The work was hard. They hauled sacks of grain, stacked wooden crates, and cut rows of corn under a sun that didn't care what flag you once saluted. Sweat soaked through Fritzy's prison uniform. His hands blistered, but no one complained. It was honest work, and after months of war, honest work felt almost holy. At midday, a woman appeared from the farmhouse carrying a tray. She had tired eyes, firm posture, and a small cross hanging at her neck. Behind her came a teenage girl in a baseball cap, Lauren, and a younger boy clutching a worn baseball glove, Jake. The boys stared at the prisoners like they might sprout horns. Henry clapped his hands. "Everybody takes 5, he said. "You too, Keller." Fritz hesitated. This had to be a trick. But Ryan nodded. "Go on, eat. Just stay where I can see you." They sat on overturned crates near the barn. The woman, Linda, Henry's wife, handed out sandwiches, even to the Germans. Jake watched them from behind his sister, curiosity battling fear. Fritz reached for a sandwich, and Linda's gaze lingered on his face. "You're Keller?" she asked carefully. Yes, Frederick Keller." Something flickered across her expression. "Huh," she murmured, "same as Henry's grandmother." Fritz frowned. "Your grandmother?" From across the yard. "My grandmother's name was Marta Keller before she married. Came over from the old country." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Guess the name followed us both ways across the ocean, huh?" The air paused silent. Mueller, Keller. Fluent German. It felt less like coincidence and more like some cosmic joke. Fritz bit into the sandwich, ham, cheese, fresh bread, and tried to make sense of it. This man, this American farmer, carried the same names as the villages Fritz had left behind, spoke the same language his mother used to sing lullabies in. But Henry wore no swastika, no uniform, no hatred in his eyes, just dirt under his nails and the weight of a harvest that wouldn't wait for anyone's war. Later, while hauling crates into the barn, Fritz noticed something strange. A small wooden door, half hidden behind hay bales. It was cracked open no more than an inch. A faint glow leaked through. Something metallic glinted in the dim light. His breath caught. Back at camp there were whispers, rumors that some German-American farmers were sympathizers, that they secretly sent information back to the Reich. Radio signals, code words, loyalty to the fatherland disguised as loyalty to Uncle Sam. Most prisoners dismissed it as fantasy. Now Fritz wasn't so sure. He glanced back. Ryan and Henry were deep in conversation near the tractor. None of the others were watching. He nudged the door with his boot. It swung open. Inside was a narrow room lined with old crates and dusty shelves. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. On one shelf sat an object covered with a cloth, wires, knobs. His heart pounded. He stepped inside. The cloth came away easily. It wasn't just any radio. It was a heavy shortwave set, the kind that could reach across oceans, the kind that could send messages to Berlin or receive them. Beside it lay a stack of envelopes tied with string. The top one was addressed in sharp blue ink. To Lucas Mueller, Appleton, Wisconsin. Fritz heard footsteps outside. He scrambled to cover the radio and stepped out just as Henry appeared in the doorway, brow furrowed. "You lost?" the farmer asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes were razor sharp. Fritz swallowed. I was looking for the water pump." Henry held his stare for a beat too long. Then, to Fritz's surprise, the farmer stepped aside and lowered his voice. "Best not to poke around in rooms that aren't yours," Henry said quietly. "Out here, folks make assumptions fast about you. About me." The message was clear. Stay in your lane. Fritz nodded and walked away, pulse racing. But the question burned in his mind like a fuse on dynamite. Was Henry Mueller a traitor, hiding in plain sight? Or was something else happening on this impossible farm? That night, the sky turned black. Wind rattled the windows at the barracks at Camp Atlanta, the P facility outside Lincoln. Fritz lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind. The shared names, the fluent German, the hidden radio, the letters. He thought of his father back in Stuttgart, the man who used to talk about a cousin who'd gone to America long before Hitler, a cousin named Johann Keller, who was never heard from again. What if Henry's grandmother, Martha Keller, was connected to that same branch of the family tree? What if Fritz had spent the day working on land his own blood had plowed decades before the war? The thought made his chest tighten. Outside, a lone coyote howled in the distance. Rain began to hammer the roof. Fritz closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Fritz stared at the note until his vision blurred. Appleton, Wisconsin. A church. A family Bible with the name Keller in it. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it deep into his pocket, where the guards wouldn't find it during inspection. The truck pulled away from the farm, rattling down the gravel road. Fritz looked back through the canvas slits. Henry stood on the porch, one hand raised in a silent farewell. Linda and the kids watched from the doorway. The dog finally barked. Fritz turned away, heart aching with a confusion he couldn't name. This was supposed to be the enemy's country, a land of strangers with strange ways and strange loyalties. But here in the middle of Nebraska, the farmers had German names. They spoke his language. They might share his blood. And they were under investigation from their own government, yet still feeding POWs bread and lemonade. Under a sky that looked no different from the one back home. Somewhere beyond the fields and fences, Appleton waited. A church, a family, answers. Fritz wasn't sure he was ready to find, but the question haunted him like a ghost. If this was the enemy's country, why did standing in that farmyard feel more like home than the uniform on his back? 3 weeks passed. The seasons changed fast in Nebraska. September gave way to October. The air turned sharp. Leaves fell like copper coins from the trees lining the farm roads. Fritz and the other prisoners returned to the Mueller farm twice more. Each time the work was the same, hauling corn, stacking bales, fixing fence posts before winter came. But something had shifted. Henry was quieter now. He still spoke German when giving instructions, but there was a weight to his words, a sadness that hadn't been there before. Linda stopped bringing lemonade to the fields. Lauren and Jake no longer watched from the doorway. The FBI visit had left scars no one talked about. On what would be their final day at the farm, the sky was gray and heavy with the promise of snow. The prisoners worked in silence, breath visible in the cold air. Ryan stamped his feet to stay warm, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Last run, fellas," he said. "Farm's closing up for the season. You'll be rotated to a factory job next week." Fritz's heart sunk. He wouldn't see this place again. Wouldn't see Henry or the farmhouse with the green shutters, or the barn where secrets had been kept and then forgiven. At midday, Henry called for a break. This time, it was just him and a thermos of coffee. No Linda, no kids. He poured cups for Ryan and the guards first, then handed one to Fritz. "Drink up," Henry said. "It's going to get colder." Fritz wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. Henry stood beside him, staring out at the fields they'd worked together. "You ever think about what comes after?" Henry asked quietly. Fritz frowned. "After? After the war," Henry said. "When it's all over. When the guns stop, and the dead are counted, and the world tries to pretend it didn't tear itself apart." Fritz didn't answer. Henry took a sip of coffee. "My grandma used to say that wars don't end when the treaties are signed. They end when the last man who remembers stops telling the story." He turned to face Fritz. "You're going to live through this, Keller. I can see it. You're smart. You keep your head down. And when it's over, you're going to go home." Fritz swallowed hard. "If there's a home to go back to." Henry nodded slowly. "Yeah, if." He paused, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a young woman in a dark dress standing in front of a farmhouse that looked nothing like the one behind them now. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes were serious. On the back, written in faded ink, was a name. Marta Keller. Stuttgart, 1889. Fritz's breath caught. "That's her," Henry said. "My grandma. She left Germany with nothing but a suitcase and a Bible.
came to America because she believed there had to be a place where people didn't kill each other over borders. He handed the photograph to Fritz. "I want you to have this." Fritz stared at the image, hands trembling. "I can't." "You can," Henry said firmly. "Because one day, when someone asks you what America was like during the war, I want you to remember this. Not the camps, not the guards, not the barbed wire." He gestured toward the fields. "I want you to remember that a farmer named Mueller fed a prisoner named Keller, and that names don't mean a damn thing when the work needs doing." Fritz looked up, tears burning his eyes. Henry's voice softened. "Maybe we're family, maybe we're not, but out here we shared bread, and that's enough." Before Fritz could respond, Ryan called out, "All right, break's over, let's finish this up." Henry clapped Fritz on the shoulder once, then walked back toward the barn. Fritz slipped the photograph into his pocket next to the note Lauren had given him. 2 pieces of paper, 2 threads connecting him to a country that wasn't supposed to feel like anything but enemy soil. The work resumed. They hauled the last of the corn, stacked the final crates, and tied down tarps over equipment that wouldn't be used until spring. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Henry stood by the barn and watched them load into the truck. Ryan counted heads, checked his clipboard, and gave the signal to go. The engine rumbled to life. Fritz sat in the back, watching through the canvas slits as the farm grew smaller and smaller. Henry raised one hand, not a wave, just a hand lifted in acknowledgement, a goodbye without words. And then the farm disappeared behind a hill, and all Fritz could see was the gray Nebraska sky. That night, back at the camp, Fritz lay in his bunk and pulled out the photograph. Marta Keller, Stuttgart, 1889. She looked like his aunt, or maybe his grandmother, or maybe just another woman who decided that staying meant dying, and leaving meant living. He thought about Henry's words. Wars don't end when the treaties are signed. They end when the last man who remembers stops telling the story. Fritz folded the photograph carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. Somewhere in Wisconsin, a church waited. A family named Mueller. A Bible with his name in it. And when the war ended, if he survived, he would go there. Not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, just as a man trying to understand how a name could cross an ocean and still mean home. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. Victory in Europe. The war was over. Fritz Keller sat in a processing camp in France waiting for repatriation. Around him, thousands of German POWs waited too, some in silence, some in tears, some in hollow-eyed disbelief. Germany had fallen. The cities were rebel, the army scattered, the Führer dead in a bunker beneath Berlin. Fritz didn't know if his father was alive, didn't know if his homestead stood, didn't know what he was going back to, but he had 2 pieces of paper in his pocket. A photograph of a woman named Marta Keller, and a note with an address in Appleton, Wisconsin. The journey home took months. He was processed, interviewed, cleared, and finally released. He traveled by rail through the skeleton of what used to be Germany.
Frankfurt, Stuttgart, villages with no names left on the signs. When he finally reached Stuttgart, his father's house was gone. Not damaged, gone. Just a crater filled with weeds and broken bricks. A neighbor told him his father had died in an air raid 2 years earlier. No grave, no marker, just dust. Fritz stood in the ruins of his childhood and felt nothing. The war had taken everything except the photograph and the note. It took another year before he could leave Germany. Paperwork, visas, sponsorships from aid organizations helping displaced persons rebuild their lives. But finally, in the spring of 1947, Frederick Keller boarded a ship bound for New York. He carried 1 suitcase, a few American dollars earned from odd jobs, and the same 2 pieces of paper he'd kept since 1944.
When the Statue of Liberty came into view, Fritz felt something crack open inside him. Not joy, not relief, just the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a place in the world where his name meant something other than defeat. From New York, he took a bus to Wisconsin. The landscape rolled past. Green hills, quiet towns, farmland that stretched forever. It reminded him of Nebraska. Appleton was small, clean. Church steeples rose above Main Street like sentinels. Fritz walked into the Lutheran church on a Wednesday afternoon. An older woman sat in the front pew polishing candlesticks. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. Fritz pulled out the note, hands shaking. "I'm looking for someone named Mueller," he said in careful English. "I was told they might know about a family named Keller." The woman's eyes widened. She stood slowly, setting down the cloth. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into a back room. Minutes passed. Then a man emerged. He was younger than Henry had been, lean with dark hair and sharp eyes, but the shape of his face, the set of his jaw was familiar. "I'm Lucas Mueller," the man said. "Henry was my uncle." "Was?" Lucas nodded, expression somber. "He passed last winter. Heart gave out while he was fixing a fence." Fritz felt the ground tilt beneath him. Lucas gestured to a pew. "Sit, please." They sat together in the quiet church, light filtering through stained glass windows. "My uncle wrote to me about you," Lucas said. "Said he met a German POW named Keller. Said he thought you might come looking one day." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "He left this for you." Fritz took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in Henry's careful handwriting. "Keller, if you are reading this, it means you survived. I'm glad. I never got to tell you the whole story. My grandmother, Marta, left Germany because her brothers were conscripted into a war she didn't believe in. She swore her children would never fight in someone else's hatred. But hatred followed us anyway. It always does. When they brought you to my farm, I saw her in your face. Maybe it was the name. Maybe it was something deeper. I don't know. But I knew this. You weren't my enemy. You were just a man far from home. Same as she was when she got off that boat in New York. The radio they took, it wasn't for spying. It was for families. People trying to reach loved ones trapped behind lines. The FBI cleared me because they knew I wasn't a traitor. I was just a fool who thought he could save people with wires and Morse code. I couldn't save everyone, but I tried. If you're in America now, it means you're free. And if you're free, you have a choice. You can carry the war with you forever, let it poison everything you touch, or you can do what my grandma did. Plant something, build something, feed someone who's hungry. There's a Keller family Bible at my house in Nebraska. Linda knows where it is. If you go there, tell her I sent you. And if you find your name in that book, then you'll know. We've been family all along. Henry Mueller. Fritz read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Lucas watched quietly, then spoke. "There's more," he said. "My Aunt Linda still lives on the farm. She told me to tell you, if you ever came, that you're welcome there any time." Fritz looked up, vision blurred. "Welcome?"
Villages with no names left on the signs. When he finally reached Stuttgart, his father's house was gone. Not damaged, gone. Just a crater filled with weeds and broken bricks. A neighbor told him his father had died in an air raid 2 years earlier. No grave, no marker, just dust. Fritz stood in the ruins of his childhood and felt nothing. The war had taken everything except the photograph and the note. It took another year before he could leave Germany. Paperwork, visas, sponsorships from aid organizations helping displaced persons rebuild their lives. But finally, in the spring of 1947, Friedrich Keller boarded a ship bound for New York. He carried 1 suitcase, a few American dollars earned from odd jobs, and the same 2 pieces of paper he'd kept since 1944. When the Statue of Liberty came into view, Fritz felt something crack open inside him. Not joy, not relief, just the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a place in the world where his name meant something other than defeat. From New York, he took a bus to Wisconsin. The landscape rolled past. Green hills, quiet towns, farmland that stretched forever. It reminded him of Nebraska,